Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to Evolve by Kamlapura Palace, Hampi. It is indeed a pleasure to have you with us this evening. We are honored to host, in collaboration with the Deccan Heritage Foundation and with Pictor as the publisher, the launch of the book City of Victory, Hampi Vijayanagara, authored by John Gollings, John M. Fritz and George Michell, followed by an illustrated lecture by Dr. George Michell. Dr. George Michell, who truly needs no introduction, is an internationally renowned architectural historian, best known for his seminal work on South Asia and the Deccan. His association with the Deccan spans over 5 decades, beginning with his doctoral research on early Chalukya temples. His extensive work on Vijayanagara has played a defining role in shaping global understanding of Hampi's urban, architectural, and cultural significance. This evening's lecture reflects a lifetime of rigorous research, close observation, and deep engagement with the site. We are privileged to have with us this evening Mr. Ravi Salikram and Mrs. Nalini Salikram, whose generous support made the publication of this book possible. We thank them for their continued commitment to the preservation and celebration of heritage. We are also honored by the presence of Mr. George T. Ramapuram, Managing Director of Evolve Resorts, and are delighted to have him with us this evening. I would now like to invite our Director Conservation at Evolve Resorts, Mr. Sharat Champati, to extend a welcome note.
Thank you, Amma. Good evening, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this evening. At Evolve our work has always been shaped by a clear sense of responsibility towards the experiences we curate in our company, the ideas we associate with, and the standards we uphold. Our philosophy of the spirit of the land guides us how we associate ourselves with the regions in which we operate, and informs the manner in which we engage with their history, their scholarship, nature and wildlife, and cultural narratives. This book launch reflects that approach. The written word continues to play a vital role in documenting, interpreting, and examining the past. Supporting such work in one way in which we seek to engage thoughtfully with the context and the histories that shape a place. We are pleased to host the author, the esteemed Dr. George Michell, and all of you this evening. Your presence lends distinction to the occasion and affirms the value of the dialogue that is measured, rigorous, and reflective. I trust you will find the discussions meaningful and the evening well spent. Thank you and welcome. Now I invite the author, Dr. George Michell, to enlighten us with his knowledge and insights. Thank you.
Yes. So before enlightening you with my insights of research, I have to work out how all this works, so to speak. Okay, hang on a second. How do I get this going? Can we have a full... we're getting there. Right. Yeah. If I give this talk to people in other parts of the world, they need a map of India. So you all know where you are, I hope, somewhere down here in the Deccan, one of the rivers flowing into the Krishna. So I thought I would tonight concentrate on some of the themes of interpretation, or the things that we were thinking about, which is very special to a study of Hampi Vijayanagara. So instead of giving you a catalogue of everything that we know about, why don't we talk about the things that John Fritz and I felt were especially important to consider in our interpretation. And we like to start with water, because one of the things everybody asks us about when they come to Hampi, what the hell is a big city doing in the middle of this wilderness? What is all this granite landscape, this marvelous, gorgeous place? How is it that a city was built here? And of course, one of the answers is water. And this management of the river is something extremely important, and I think not yet fully studied, because I'm not a hydraulic engineer. But one of the points is that this river, the Tungabhadra, loses height. As it flows through this area, it goes down a little bit, and this permits anikats, or high-level channels. And these run through the site, irrigating the fields today as they did in Vijayanagara times. And without this management and this understanding of hydraulics, this city could never have grew up, and it could never have created the food to support the enormous population. We don't know how many people, but however many people needed food. So this is something, I think, which we discovered, that these channels that are still seen in the landscape, some of them go back to the 14th and 15th centuries. They may even go back earlier, but certainly what is happening today in the fields, in the site, exploits an ancient Vijayanagara system. Another thing that I think was very important for us to understand is that the landscape itself is related to local belief systems. And the Vijayanagara kings seem to have been very skilled in manipulating these different systems to underpin their power. So one of the systems was, of course, the Ramayana. And here we have this famous cave of Ravana with Anjanadri hill on top. Now, I don't know why I thought that. Yeah, okay. So this Ramayana association was not invented during Vijayanagara times. We believe it goes back into prehistoric times. We don't have any evidence of it, but no doubt it was something that was exploited by the kings, the Rama temple and all the Rama imagery throughout the site, and it is today still the dominant attraction. So in Hampi Vijayanagara we have the original tourists who are pilgrims. And they are coming, of course, not only to the sites associated with that, but of course what's happening at Anjanadri Hill today, the thousands of people who go there today to visit the birthplace of Hanuman, whose sculpture is in the landscape. So the actual boulders, the fabric of the site, also exploits this imagery. And this is something, which you all probably don't even think about, but it's something very special to do with this site. That the boulders, the rivers, the caverns, the hilltops, they are all imbued with these associations. And that gives meaning to the site, and it's something that the Vijayanagara kings were able to exploit. The other system that works here, parallel, is of course the marriage of Pampa and Virupaksha. Many of you understand that Pampa, the goddess of the river, is the same name as Hampi, the village. And of course the famous legend of Pampa being betrothed and eventually married to Shiva under the name of Virupaksha is central to the religious system of the Hampi area. And this is a painting showing the marriage of Pampa and Virupaksha on the ceiling of the Virupaksha temple mandapa. Even though the mandapa itself is 16th century, we know about it, the painting is much later. And we think it's possibly a repainting of an original ceiling composition. And at some point in the 19th, maybe late 18th, 19th centuries, it was redone. And there's much of restoration in the Virupaksha complex that belongs to this period, including the great Gopura at the end of the bazaar street, the Gopura on the northern entrance leading down to the river, and some of the details of the temple were all redone in the late 18th, 19th centuries. And this is still, at least for me and John, Fritz, this is still a mystery. We don't seem to have a historical grasp on what happened here actually when part of the Hampi Vijayanagara site was restored. And there's some Britisher even involved, which makes it even more mysterious, because here we have lands which were recently reclaimed from the Nizam. There was the British cantonment at Bellari. All sorts of things are happening, and then there's Tipu Sultan. It's a very unstable moment in the history of the Deccan, during which something happens at Hampi. And some of the mandapas have these big double-storied facades, and these seem to be added to the original ones. So all this goes to show how the power of the cult of Virupaksha and Pampa continues. Another aspect of the site, of course, is the actual fabric of the rocks and the power of the water. This, of course, is one of those famous mandala lingas, Koti Linga, near the river. And in old days, this would have been flooded. Before the building of the dam, when seasonally much of Hampi was flooded, water would have flowed over this, and presumably it happens from time to time, even today, when the dam has to discharge more water. So again, the river, Shiva, and this system of Pampa and Virupaksha, as well as the Ramayana, all sort of interlock to make this a very complicated site. And one thing that we always want to stress in our interpretation, that Hampi is just not another ancient place in Peninsular India, in the Deccan. It's an imperial city. And we have to understand we don't have other imperial cities to compare it with. There is nothing else in South India like Hampi Vijayanagara, because it was the headquarters of not just a kingdom, but an empire. And one way of perhaps defining an empire, how is an empire different to a kingdom? An empire is a political entity with different peoples. People of different ethnic background, different religious affiliations, different languages, and different systems. And the point of an empire is to bring together all these people into some sort of common political, legal system. And of course, you may know at the Vitala temple there is an inscription by, of course, Krishnadevaraya, and it's in 3 languages. It's in Tamil, it's in Telugu, and it's in Kannada, which is just immediately indicates the sort of languages that people spoke and the languages that people could read. So we have these Ramayana systems, we have these, let's say, local Virupaksha Pampa system, which is to do with Hampi. So these are, I would say, religious systems and belief to do with the place, to do with where we are. Empires are also places where beliefs from other areas are brought to the capital. If any of you have been to Rome, ancient Rome, you will see shrines to all sorts of gods and goddesses who represent different peoples of the empire. So one way of, for the emperors of Vijayanagara to have forged links that meant something with far-flung peoples of the empire was to build temples and sponsor monuments to do with their gods. So Narasimha, this amazing monolith, not very well restored. I mean, it's a problem the way it looks today, but nonetheless, this was commissioned by Krishnadevaraya, not because he was particularly pious, but he wanted the affiliation of the people who believed in Narasimha. And the Narasimha cult, some of you may know, is based at a place called Ahobalam. It's in the eastern Ghats, in what is now Andhra Pradesh, this wild, forested, hilly region, where is the holiest shrine of Narasimha. And the warriors from this area, the Nayaks, were very important in the army of Vijayanagara. So commissioning something like this was a way of affiliating the royal household with the belief systems of these people. And this makes it very exciting to have all these different cult images at the capital. Oops, hang on. Oh. So, just another quick look at the site in terms of the plan. Here is the river, Here, of course, are the great temples, and what we used to call, and we still call, the sacred center. And this are the rivers and the canals going through the irrigated valley, separating these great temple complexes from the urban core, which is this complete fortified area. And you may not notice these walls if you wander around the site, because they run along the hilltops. You see irregularly here, all the way along, then they jump across to this hilltop and across. So the shape of it is dictated by the topography. So it's not a planned city in terms of geometry, it's a planned city in terms of exploiting the natural landscape. And again, this is another one of the amazing things about this place, how that the designers, the architects, the engineers, under the direction probably of the imperial court, could work out how to do this so successfully. Hang on. I don't know why these pictures are not quite in the sequence I'd have remembered them in. No matter. Here is the gateway, of course, leading at the top of Hemakuta Hill, the pathway leading down to the thing. And going back to the Pampa Virupaksha cult. This, of course, is a Hemakuta Hill place. Those of you who know the site, this is where the legend took place, where Pampa, the beautiful maiden of the river, was very pious. She presented food and looked after the sadhus on the hill, all these Shaivite guys, and Shiva up there was very impressed with her to such an extent. She must have been, of course, extremely beautiful as well, but he decided that he should be betrothed to her. So the earliest part of the site under the Vijayanagara kings, where this cult was expanded, is on Hemakuta Hill with these temples. And this style of temple with these layer cake sort of pyramidal roofs, all in granite, is typical of the 14th century. So this is the type of architecture that was happening when the Vijayanagara kingdom and then empire was founded. This is the type of drawings, the type of work that was done when John Fritz and I attracted volunteer architecture students who would come, and we would do these sorts of drawings. And in those days, it'll be hard for some of you to believe, we used ladders and measuring tapes, pencils, paper, things that have disappeared from, the surveying world these days. There was, of course, no telephone, it doesn't matter anyhow. But it was a great experience. And these drawings now were done probably in the early 80s by architecture students. We did everything in pencil, because there was so much dust flying around, we couldn't have very clean paper. But the pencil drawings were then taken out of India, and then we had students, Australia, the UK, and the US, who then made the ink drawings, which we then published. But all of the original pencils, some of them a bit grubby because they were done at the site, but all of the work that we did in pencil and ink, mapping and measuring, all of this material has now gone to the British Library. And that is a very good repository, because when they eventually catalogue everything, it will be available free of charge 7 days a week to any interested person. So it will be safe, and because the British Library knows how to look after paper. Not always easy in this country, but The interior of these temples on Hemakuta Hill are quite rudimentary. They're not very sophisticated. They are from that period. And this is the interior of a temple which has 3 linga shrines. And we know from the inscription on it that this temple was meant to be a memorial shrine for Mr. Sangama. From the earliest people who began the dynasty, the Sangama dynasty, they were local people. And the first thing they did when they started to have power was to build shrines to memorialize their parents. And this was done through lingas. And then they say in the inscription, to my father, to my mother, to my ancestor. So they wanted to be associated with the hill, with the Pampa Virupaksha legend. So there's something quite interesting about royal commemoration, family, and the legend of Hampi. We also have these sorts of temples, which are sort of abandoned, which we studied at some point. This is an early sort of rather Tamil-style temple, which was in the 80s and 90s, unlisted, unmarked, and almost inaccessible, dedicated to Krishna, or Balakrishna, facing onto a road that ran through one of the valleys. And I think this has now probably been cleared, and there's probably a fence and a garden. You know what the Archaeological Survey of India is like. They put gardens, and the horticultural branch gets very active with the grass and the lawns, you know. And of course, by the 15th century, temple architecture is reaching new sophisticated levels. So this was state-of-the-art, early 15th century temple art, very Tamil. So suddenly we're getting into influences from another region, and this is because Vijayanagara Empire encapsulated this region, which was very wealthy in terms of art traditions and architectural practices, and they compelled all of the skilled people to come to the capital and execute temples. And when I was doing a survey of Vijayanagara period architecture, that is, temples built during the period of Vijayanagara, not only here, I found almost nothing in Tamil Nadu. I traveled all around, I couldn't find anything. This was, I was led to believe by somebody who did economic history. He said, don't you understand? Under the Vijayanagara kings, Tamil Nadu was milked. They exploited all the wealth and brought everything to the capital. They put governors there, but the governors had no independent wealth. They couldn't build anything or do anything. So Tamil Nadu had a sort of lull in terms of activity there, but many Tamil artists came to Hampi Vijayanagara, and we have Tamil inscriptions on some temples to give us evidence. So we don't know exactly who built this in terms of artisans, but this particular blend of stone and brick, just getting my finger here, stone, granite, and then brick superstructure. This type of building was not known in this part of India before Vijayanagara. It comes in the 15th century as Tamil influences come with Tamil styles of sculpture and art. And of course, these famous images of the Ramayana, some of us were there this afternoon to again show these stories, and of course we watched this, the shooting of the bad Monkey King, you know, and then with the great Sugriva being greeted by Rama. So these stories, as portrayed on the wall like this, is another Tamil thing. If you go to Tanjore from the Chola period, you will see temples which have images carved on the walls in between the pilasters like this, not just placed in the niches, but carved on the walls. And again, something else that doesn't happen in this region until this Tamil influence. So I'm an art historian or architectural historian. We are very keen on this sort of thing. We like to trace, where do things come from? Where do they go? How do they get altered in the process? That's our sort of mission. Of course, it's only part of the story, but it's what we try to do. And of course, some of us looked today at this famous image of Rama seated, here's Lakshmana, giving his ring to Hanuman, telling Hanuman, you go off and look for Sita. We believe she's been kidnapped. She's down in Lanka, in the, the evil Ravana has taken her away. And when you find her, you give her my ring, so she knows you are an envoy from me. And those of us who went to the temple today, on exactly the opposite side of the temple, in the same position, there is Sita giving her hair ornament to Hanuman, so he can take it back to Rama to prove that he found her. So this coordination of storytelling, architecture, space, and carving is something which we can appreciate reached all sorts of new heights of sophistication in this Rama temple in the middle of the royal center, the Hazarama temple as we call it. Now, what is so fascinating about this is that the Rama temple, which is in the middle of the royal center, at the heart of the king's palace area, if you like, is contained within the imagery of the king. So the outside walls of the temple have nothing to do with the Rama or the legends or anything, but all to do with the ceremonial life of the king. And here we have all the imperial horses, elephants, warriors, and women, which we know from the descriptions of the processions. So it's as if the king is encapsulating, is enclosing the realm of the god. So it's not the god enclosing the king, but the other way round. And I think that's very important here, that they are able, the royal figures here, to harness the strength and powers of the gods and the legends and encompass them within their own realm. So at the core, in the central part of the royal center, this royal chapel has the king's imagery within which is Rama. And you cannot find, to my knowledge, this sort of imagery in any other temple in India. I've never seen anything quite like this before. It's an invention of the Vijayanagara kings. And I can't tell you how often we are reminded of the creativity in an artistic, architectural sense of these rulers. Something which I'm particularly interested in. They were great patrons of novelties and innovations, and I think it's true also in literature and dance and music, though I'm not the specialist for that. Close up. The elephants, the royal horses, and as I pointed out to everybody who goes there, look, it's not the horse riders. This is not a cavalry. These are the horses themselves, which are important, and they are being led by Arabs. These are the foreigners who brought the horses to Vijayanagara. And some of you may be better informed than me. I don't understand why horses they had trouble breeding horses in the Deccan. There was always a need for more horses. So it was a fantastic business for people who had the trade of the Indian Ocean, which of course were the Arabs in the 15th century. The story changes in the 16th century because then the Portuguese arrive. And then if you go to Vittala Temple, 16th century, you can see reliefs of horses being led by Portuguese. One of the great shrines on the hill above Hampi, with those of you who've been inside will know this huge rock carved with a great Ganesha image. Oh, hang on, did we lose something? Hang on. So, the original Pampa Virupaksha shrine at Hampi was nothing very special architecturally, but it was expanded continually during the Vijayanagara period. This is the latest expansion under Krishnadeva, that famous ruler in the early part of the 16th century. And he had this mandapa, this hall, hang on, sorry, this hall added to the temple in what was the state of art of the new architecture. And he did this on the occasion of his coronation in 16. Somebody can correct me on that. Anyhow, here, if you go into the temple, as you walk in, on the right is this slab which tells the whole story. I, Krishnadeva, on the occasion of my coronation, had this mandapa built and added to this. So he's very proud of it, as he may well be. And the interesting thing about it is this fantastic treatment of columns. This is something really the Vijayanagara architects and artists sort of invented. You take a column which supports something, after all, and you turn it not only into sculptures with nice panels like this, but you add things to it. So here can you make out this leaping yali, this leaping beast, ridden not by a god or a goddess or anybody holy, but by a warrior with weapons. So it's a sort of martial theme that is there in the architecture, because this was a martial military period. Or you cut out this colonnette, this like a little tiny column, three-dimensional with a space, and this is one piece of granite. Do you understand it? This is not an attachment. This is one piece of granite. So the technology to carve such things is extremely involved, complicated, and these techniques were developed under Vijayanagara patronage, something that we admire. Of course, the great tanks. This is the flooded version of the tank in front of the Balakrishna temple, if I remember rightly. Now it's been fixed up. I'm not sure Does it still attract water? Has anybody seen water in it? I've seen it just dry these days, but anyhow, something quite important, that this management of water also insisted that all the big temples had to have bathing places, large tanks, and of course there were these ceremonies with boats, you may know, that at certain occasions images were floated out and then placed here with candles at night. I've seen such things still in Tamil Nadu. I don't know, probably it happens here in Karnataka, but I haven't seen it. And this marvelous aerial photograph, those of you who can, should of course go to the top of Matanga Hill and look down on what we call Achyutaraya temple, the temple built during Achyutaraya's reign in the 1530s by one of his commanders, and it's one of the grand monuments of the period. It's also one of the first monuments to have a double enclosure. I'll explain. Here is the shrine of the god. This is Venkateshwara, the same god at Tirupati, Tirumala. Here is Lakshmi next to it. So the inner shrine, surrounded by a wall with a colonnade and a towered entrance called a gopura. Then the whole thing is enclosed in a second enclosure. So it's a double enclosure. And this is not added later. It was part of the original design. So this is also an invention of Vijayanagara, these double, triple enclosures that we get later on. And then the whole, gosh, I'm sorry about this. And then the temple is approached through this great colonnaded street that runs from the river southwards towards the temple. And the colonnades, you can see, this of course was for chariots. And when the archaeologists dug away at the fields, they found stone pavements. And you have to remember, in the 16th century, anywhere in the world, Europe, there were not many streets that were paved. They were dirt, you know, so this was quite an investment. And what's interesting for me, that at the back of the temple, or at least one side, we have all these irrigated fields, you see here, with waterways running through them, part of the irrigational system. And this is not unusual because temples managed land and food storage and production. The king and the court and the army were away for many, many months at a time on warring campaigns. They had to go down and check that all the governors were behaving themselves and paying their taxes, and then they had to go on pilgrimage, and of course moving 100,000 people at a time across South India took months and months. So they weren't around all the time, and the population of the city must have gone all the way down and then went all the way back up when they returned. In the meantime, it was the temples who were responsible for managing the waterways and the food. And many of the inscriptions on the temples tell us this. They talk about management of land, so much of wetland, of dry land, of production, and it's all to do with economics and food. And there, of course, in some temples, we have actual granaries. You may have seen the one in the Balakrishna temple. Another one of the walkways through from Vitalapura, through along the river, past this marvelous portal known as the King's Balance. And I find many of the signage at the site unreliable, but I think this actually works. I think it is a King's Balance. I think it was something with a metallic chain with, pans like this, balancing. Probably not diamonds and pearls, maybe food and, good things for the Brahmins, perhaps not that precious. Anyhow, it's an amazing structure. And we have, if you go to, I think it's Chandragiri and the fort, you can see another one which is better preserved. And then the gateway leading along the pathway. A distant view of Vitala Temple, one of the most amazing monuments that we have here. All of you who visited the site, you will have seen it or plan to. This is a distant view, and you can see how the complex is on an urban scale, imperial scale. We've got here gigantic planning, all fitted into this landscape. So everything has to be fitted in between the boulders and the river, which it is sort of. I think we have even hang on. Right, that's a closer shot. Sorry, this is one of yours, I think. No, one of the photographers here, who does these marvelous panoramas. You can see these colonnaded streets. if any of you are familiar with Roman architecture, and you've been to Ephesus and these great sites on the Mediterranean, you will see these great colonnaded streets. It's an imperial thing, huge scale, huge processions, huge things happening in and around the temple. And this is something which is, of course, the Vijayanagara kings specialized in. The only problem with this monument, which is dedicated to Vittala, who seems to be a form of Vishnu, who was worshipped in a shrine in southern Maharashtra, we don't quite know how this cult got to Vijayanagara. There's one idea that maybe the image in the temple at, I think it's Pandharpur, in the southern part of Maharashtra, was brought for safety into the realm of Vijayanagara, but we have no history for this. Nor do we know who built the temple to begin with. And I have some ideas, of course, but we know who added to the temple. We know who added the extra shrines. The two queens of Krishnadevaraya added the gopuras. Then the military commander added the great open mandapa in front. But I think because it's such an imperial temple, it's on such a grand scale, it has something to do with dynastic imagery or identity. Let's see what the next... so this is just a plan. So this is the original temple here. This was added later. This was by one of the queens of Krishnadevaraya, these two gopuras. This is a Krishnadevaraya edition with the trilingual inscription. And these were also added later. So we know Krishnadevaraya, okay, added this, his queens added that, this was added later, but who built this to begin with is really the question. Who began it? Those of you who've studied Vijayanagara history will know there are several dynasties. The third great dynasty got going just at the turn of the 16th century, the Tulava dynasty. And there were three half-brothers who ruled. And my hunch, my hypothesis, is that to inaugurate this dynasty, they decided to build a great new temple, a Vaishnava temple, and that the first of these half-brothers built this, and then when he died, the next half-brother added these and his queens, and then so forth, and the temple kept on being added to. But this idea of a large temple was something to establish the new dynasty, after all this period of unrest in the previous dynasty. This type of architecture, this sort of towered gateway, we call it a gopura in South India. This is a Tamil import. These types of gateways are known from the 11th and 12th century in Tamil Nadu, but never in Karnataka or Andhra. So it seems that when the Vijayanagara kings wanted to have great monumental gateways, they called upon this architecture from Tamil Nadu, brought people perhaps from Tamil Nadu, and started building these type of large gateways, which have lower parts in granite. Oh dear, my finger goes onto the wrong thing. Here, with these hollow brick towers, and as you probably know, these towers were supported with timber frameworks. They're like a timber skeleton inside. And when people robbed the timbers over all the years, the bricks started to collapse. And of course, it's not as durable as stone, and the sculptures on it have, of course, worn away. So this is a sort of partial reconstruction that the archaeological survey is doing now. And this is the main temple. Again, this combination of stone and brick is very typical. The main walls, quite austere, and then this ornate brick tower above the sanctuary inside. And all of you will know, have you been to this temple, no image is there. It's an empty sanctuary. This temple was violated, wrecked, but they didn't bother with the outer walls. They just wrecked the interior so it couldn't operate. This would have been painted and probably nice metallic, maybe gilded, golden finials at the top. The glory of the temple is this mandapa added in the 1540s, just before the destruction, the great catastrophic battle of 1565. And this is a real showcase of granite carving, because the architects have manipulated vertical supports, that is columns, and turned them into these incredibly complicated compositions with sculptures, with cut-out little colonnettes. You can barely understand that this is all each one of them is out of a single block of granite. But they perform a marvelous function because they filter the light. The glare from the outside is filtered through all these colonnettes in this complex architecture. And again, we have these rearing yalis, these mythical beasts with warriors. And if you go to the Vittala temple and you look at these warriors, you'll find they are in different dress. And there seem to be South Indian warriors, and there seem to be Muslim warriors, warriors with slippers and beards and little pointed hats. And we have the feeling that Muslims were also employed in the Vijayanagara Empire. They were very good, of course, with horses and horse training, and we have several Muslim quarters within the Vijayanagara site. And then, you're all familiar with this most famous emblem of Hampi Vijayanagara, the chariot without the roof. The chariot that doesn't move, which has wheels that don't rotate. It's a sort of model of a wooden chariot in which Garuda, a little image of Garuda, was originally housed, facing inwards to Vittala, who's a form of Vishnu. And if you look very carefully, let me get this in. In the front, there were wonderful elephant balustrades. But these are not original. They were brought from somewhere and plonked there. Behind them, you will see the tails of horses. So originally, there were horses pulling the chariot, not elephants pulling the chariot. So you look out next time you go there. Do I have let's see. And that's how it looked in the 19th century. So it had this wonderful brick tower with a sort of domical roof, and I've never been able to understand why this was pulled down. It's in a pretty bad shape, but this could have been restored and fixed up. So what is the story? I've not been able to find any record of somebody saying this is no good, we must pull it down, we will replace it. I've not found these records. They must be there somewhere, but I've not found them. We looked through all of the archaeological records and historical records. Something happened between the 1850s and 1860s when these photographs were taken and the 20th century. And so we've got used to it without the top. And it's gone onto the 5 rupee note. It's become an emblem, and it's wrong. You see, that's the trouble. It's not right. This is how it was. It looks much better, of course. You have to understand we are dealing with a sort of a mistake. And it's a shame. And, of course, if somebody came to us and said, well, okay, what should we do? How would you be able to replicate that? But the technology is there today. You can take a photograph, you can make extremely three-dimensional models and replicate it. It would be possible to do properly, but I don't think there's any plan to do it. I'm not sure we would trust some of the local people to do it. So let's see. Okay, just to show you, we're in the 16th century. Horses are still required in the Tulava dynasty in the 16th century, but this time the Arabs have been displaced by the Portuguese. And here they are, these funny characters are Europeans. And we know all about this, and of course, those of you who've read any history will have come across the accounts of Hampi Vijayanagara by the Portuguese horse traders / spies who were sent here from Europe to check out what was going on at Hampi Vijayanagara and probably masquerading as horse traders, and they left accounts because they were supposed to find out how many people in the army, how wealthy were the kings, what was their territories, all these things that horse traders don't need to know, but people in Europe wanted to know. So we have these marvelous accounts which are reproduced in all the books, including the guidebook that some of you may use of John and myself. And then this interpretation of the central part of the site, that here is the Rama temple in the middle, and this axis going north-south, and this is the zone of royal performance, which we keep on suggesting, which means we interpret what we find here, including the Lotus Mahal and all these things here, as part of the public ceremonial life of the king, and all these remains here to do with the private residential side. You could say this is the zone of women, this is the zone of men. Well, that is one simple way of thinking. But I think this is something which John Fritz, was his anthropological background of analyzing spaces and looking for alignments. This is a sort of thinking that I was not trained in, but he was. And I think it's an interpretation that helps us a great deal in understanding how this works. And he was the first one to pick up on the alley that runs through the royal center is aligned with the temple and where Rama is being worshipped. So Rama's shrine is here. And above Rama's shrine is the summit, the top of the tower of the temple. And above the top of the temple is the top of Matanga Hill. So that the temple, the god, the temple, and the hill all seem to be coordinated. And this is not an accident. So, and Matanga Hill, of course, is connected with the story of Rama. Matanga being a sage who protected Sugriva, am I right? And it was part of the story of the Kishkinda chapter, the Ramayana. So this is important to realize that this monument, in the middle of all these remains, is a coordinating factor in the landscape and meaning of the site for the Vijayanagara kings. This shows you, of course, what was cleared of the zone of royal, of private, residence. We only have the stone basements of residences. And this so-called nobleman's quarter, which some of you may have seen, which is to the east of the temple, when we began working, none of this was visible. It was just a naked, hill slope. And then they cleared and found the basements, the stone and rubble remains of palaces. And this is how a palace looks. It's quite a simple, sort of symmetrical building with different levels, lower, and you progress upwards. You see here, you go up, 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 till you come to the chambers at the top. And these little crosses represent footings for timber columns. So they had like a veranda of timber columns. Of course, of the walls, almost nothing is left. And there are these mythical, these monsters that accompany you as you go from one level to the next. And of course, the water systems, which are so important at Vijayanagara, are a unique feature of the royal center, these canals and aqueducts to feed water and to bring water from the great reservoir, including the one at Kamalapuram. So these were rainwater tanks from which aqueducts and channels came, and there's a whole hydraulic system of the royal system, royal center, which is very important. And, of course, this discovery. This happened in the 1980s after we began working. So our first maps didn't show it because it wasn't there. It was just a sort of empty dirt area. And then one of the archaeologists noted this chute going down. He dug up, and there it was. This has not been restored. This is exactly how it was found. All the pieces were in perfect order. But on the ground, it was flat. Normally, if this had been abandoned, you'd expect it to be a bit like this. It would have sort of caved in. So the mystery is, from the end of the story, that this seems to have been filled in at some point for some reason. We don't know. The second mystery is that this was not from this area. This is a tank of which all the bits were brought from somewhere else. This is a very unlikely conclusion, you would think, but we found, with the help of local people who could read Kannada, each block has an annotation. It tells us which side, which orientation, and which level. So like block 5, north, level 6. Block 6, level 7, zone south. It's a sort of thing you do when you dismantle a building and you want to re-erect it. And this type of stone, this chlorite stone, is not found at Hampi. It's found in the area around Gadag and Lakundi, about 120 kilometers, or I don't know, a couple of hours from here, where such tanks are also found. So the theory is, Krishna Deva Raya, let's say, one of the great kings of Vijayanagara, is passing by on one of his campaigns, and he sees this. He says, I like this. I want to have this in my palace. Yes, sir. The next day, 275 bullock carts arrive, and they pull the whole thing to pieces because the blocks are not that big. They're not immense. It is not impossible to dismantle such a thing because it's made up of small bits. and reassemble it. And I would say it's the most spectacular discovery at Vijayanagara in the years since I've been at the site. So it's really something worth seeing, as you know. Now we come to the great Mahanavami platform. This amazing structure, solid platform, which again is another invention of the Vijayanagara architects. Such things don't exist at other places in India. Associated with the great 9 Nights festival, where, as you may know, the king worshipped Durga, the goddess, for blood sacrifices to empower his body, his weapons, and his animals for campaigns of war. And this always takes place between the end of the wet season and the beginning of the dry season, the September-October transition. And it was known in later history as Dasara. And of course it was celebrated until recently with great pomp in places like Mysore, as you know. But the Mysore Dasara is a continuation of the Vijayanagara Mahanavami. And the idea was the king had to be seen, had to be visible, worshipping and making sacrifices to the goddess. He couldn't do it privately, he had to go somewhere where he could be seen. So we have the idea that he ascended to the top of this platform where some sort of temporary shrine was erected and did it with everybody beneath looking at it. And it has all this amazing royal imagery on it, things which to do with the king's life. So nothing to do with Durga, mythology, religion, all to do with the power and the things that the king is involved with. Animals, horses, camels, animal fights, animal hunting, reception, dancing, music. These sorts of scenes. Wonderful scenes of what we think are Muslim horsemen, because they were very good at training horses. Camels. Can we believe that camels were really here at Hampi Vijayanagara? They appear on the monuments. We can't be sure. Maybe they brought some from Rajasthan, who knows? But hunting deer. Look at this wonderful scene of the royal figure shooting a deer who flee. So this is a lively, not very sophisticated type of carving. You don't find it on temples, you find it here on the platform. And this amazing scene, a puzzling scene of a seated royal figure, maybe the king, receiving 2 people who are giving respect by holding their hands down. And look how they're dressed. They have long tunics, they have pigtails, they have little pointed hats and they have beards, and they are Muslims. But are they from the sultans of the dynasties of Bida, the Deccan sultans, or are they people who have arrived by sea from some other part of the Islamic world? We don't know, but it shows you what's going on. And we have these dancing figures. These are Central Asian Turks. And we know this from their costume, because they wear these funny little pointed hats. And look at the tunics. They wear slippers. One is dancing with a ribbon, and the other is pressing a tambourine. So we think this may be part of the Central Asian characters who came with the first Sultanate invasion of the Deccan at the end of the 14th century and stayed on because they were employed as entertainers and guardians under the Vijayanagara kings. And we know that Muslims made their home in Vijayanagara. This is the mosque and tomb of somebody called Mr. Ahmed Khan. And he was obviously connected with the horse training, and he erected this pavilion which functioned like a mosque. We found a mihrab, a prayer niche in it, and it has a date 1430 something or other. So this is in the Muslim quarter in the northwest part of the city, where there are many Muslim graves. So there were, and Kadirampuram has also these great tombs. So part of the population of the city was also Muslim, connected with the military, we think. And of course, these are the remains of palaces with this sort of architecture, which you have seen. And here we have this hybrid architecture where elements coming from the sultans is melded, is fused with elements coming from temple architecture. It's a hybrid style, and it's only in the royal center. It's a royal style. You don't find it all over the site. You find it in the enclosures of the royal center. It's something which was devised, invented for the kings and for the court. And it's very fanciful and very delightful, and it's full of different sorts of elements. Here's a watchtower or a pavilion of pleasure within the royal centre. And here we have the Queen's Bath. This is an old 1856 photograph, and what's interesting, it shows these towers, which have completely disappeared. The only evidence we have that they existed is from this photograph. So in the middle of the cotton fields. And some of us were there this afternoon. Again, look at these balconies, which are very sultanate, with these arched forms. And this was a pleasure pool for the Vijayanagara court. And I don't believe for a moment that the queens of Vijayanagara were bathing there, because this is not where the queens lived. But I think women were bathing there, but they were not related to the court, if you get my meaning. So this was a sort of male pleasure place with women in the water. And of course the famous Lotus Mahal, in a wonderful night shot taken by John Gollings. This, of course, is the ultimate in sort of hybrid architecture with, sultanate elements, with decoration and arches and temple-like eaves and towers. This sort of decoration. This was probably done by the same artists who worked at Bidar and Gulbarga. They were the sultans of the same period as Vijayanagara. Now, whether these artists were Muslims and Hindus, we have no idea, and it doesn't matter. They were obviously took work wherever it came. So having worked here, then they worked there, and one of the places they worked was the Lotus Mahal. As you can see, from this marvelous decoration here. But this bit, you see here, this monster mask, that comes from temple art. You would never find that in a tomb or a mosque if you went to Gulbarga or Bidar. But you would find this sort of decoration and these sorts of roundels. So this is really an important little clue as to how artisans moved between different places, different kingdoms, as work came by, and that it didn't seem to be any sort of problem. And of course, the ultimate synthesis of these different type of architectures is this great invention of the elephant stables, which all of you know about, and is the most famous building within the royal centre. And each of these is like a little Islamic tomb with a dome. Here, of course, the upper chamber was for musicians, drummers, and in front, as I keep on telling people when we go there, was not a lovely garden and a tree and a very pleasant environment. This was a Maidan, a dirt area for parades of animals and troops. And therefore the Lotus Mahal, which is nearby, was not a place for women to, sing and entertain. This was a place for the military commander or the king to deal with planning campaigns. So the Lotus Mahal, misnamed, it's not an original name, of course, the elephant stables and the nearby sort of watching pavilion were all to do with the military ceremonial side of the king, all to do with, public performance, the zone of royal performance. Very difficult to capture in a single photograph, as some of you may have tried. It's so very long, you have to take an angled view. And I think this is the end, just to finish off, to remind us that there's so much about Vijayanagara that is still alive today, especially in the Hampi area of the site. This is one of the ceremonies within the Vijayanagara compound. Suri, what is the ceremony?
This is Kartika Masa they do this.
Well, yeah, it's a special time, because your photograph, yes, I just couldn't remember. And, of course, the sadness of the bazaar having been cleaned. Those of us who have been here in earlier times remember the mess, the untidiness, the exuberance of the market street as it used to be, with the cafes and the internet cafes and the places you could eat, and I don't know. It was a complete mess, but it was a real experience. And it was an authentic experience of a sacred place. And that in southern India we have all these markets, these commercial places where you can eat and drink and stay and do things on the way back from the temple. And this is something that has been interfered with here at Hampi. And this is something which I regret, because I can remember what fun it was to hang out in the bazaar in the old days. We always meet, Now there's nowhere to hang out. It's forlorn. And this is one part of the site which I don't enjoy anymore. So these things happen at Hampi Vijayanagara, but despite the things that have happened that are good, that happened that are not so good, we are all here because we feel this is one of the unique places in India where we can sense the relationship of landscape, of sacred vibrations due to all the different gods and goddesses which are embedded in the landscape, history, imperial ideas, artistic invention, and marvelous architectural creativity. So that is something I think all of you can appreciate, and I'm hoping that in this book some of these ideas and some of these images will be conveyed. So I must thank you here at Evolve for hosting me and allowing me to speak, and of course our friends Ravi and Nalini here, Shaligram, for being here and give me the opportunity of sharing my views about Hampi with them as we go around the site, and for helping to make this wonderful book possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Michell, for the fascinating lecture and for generously sharing your insights and reflection with us this evening. I'm sure our audience will carry back with them fond memories of this enriching experience. May I kindly invite Mr. Ravi Salikram and Mrs. Nalini Salikram, along with Mr. George T. Ramapuram and Dr. George Michell, to formally launch the book.
We should all be just have
Can come on together.
Thank you. Congratulations. And Nalini, you wore the colour of the book. So we decided, when we designed this book, we should have a colour to offset the black and white photographs. And we searched and searched and searched, and we ended up something which matches the dress.
Is that what was
I don't think we couldn't have planned it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
At this moment, I would like to invite our General Manager, Mr. Bipin Bidappa, to kindly extend a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Amar. Namaskara and good evening, one and all. On behalf of Evolve Kamalapura Palace, Hampi, I extend my sincere thanks to each one of you for being with us this evening. It has truly been a privilege to host such a meaningful gathering, one that celebrates our shared heritage, history, and the spirit of learning. At Evolve, we believe in honoring the spirit of the land, not only through our landscape and hospitality, but also through its stories, tradition, and intellectual legacy. Evening such as this allow us to create a space where ideas are shared, conversation flows, and a deeper connection to culture is nurtured. Your presence has added great value to this occasion. While a book draws strength from its scholarship, it is through gathering like these that ideas come alive, are reflected upon, and become part of large dialogue. We are truly grateful for your time and engagement this evening. We look forward to welcoming you again for future edition of our Palace Talks series. Until then, we invite you to join us for high tea, where Dr. George Michell will be happy to sign copies of his books here and respond any questions you may have. Thank you once again, and have a pleasant evening. Thank you all.